Hello and welcome to you wherever you are in the world. It's another episode of Live from the Green Room with me. I'm Bruce. I'm head of content here at Live Group and I'm your host for this conversation. And this conversation today is with Caitlin Moore, one of our senior producers at Live Group and someone who I am very happy to say is just as insane about content as I am. Caitlin, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing very well, surviving all of this lockdown. Looking forward to some freedom.
Looking forward to some freedom. Yeah, I think the announcements, certainly in the UK, have definitely helped lift some spirits, and it's just seemed to coincide with a bit of sunshine outside as I look out the window. So all moods seem to be lifted. Caitlin, thank you for joining us. If anyone's watching that's kind of caught up with the two of us on LinkedIn over the past few days, you know that we've been bigging this up and have been quite honest with how much we're kind of looking forward just to talking about this. We're going to be starting with a kind of hopefully more of a wide-ranging question, but one that gets into something I know sits quite at the centre of our hearts. Is do you think people talk about content enough?
Do I think they talk about it enough? I think it often gets brushed aside in the process. I think I've always thought that. I feel like as we're moving so much into this virtual world, we have moved into it really as an industry. I feel as though the focus is coming onto content. When I think about all the webinars and all the blogs that have started happening from, let's say, March onwards last year, the word around the industry was all about content. But I still think when we come to actually delivering jobs, it does tend to be one of the last things considered a lot of the time, or perhaps not given as much importance. But I do strongly feel that in the physical events world as well, it was quite similar, that we can get so caught up on what the stage looks like and, you know, where the flow of the people and some things around catering and those sorts of things, which are all really important and do help facilitate the content as well. It's important that it's a whole picture. But I do think that quite often, like, people don't stop to say, hold on, what are we talking about again? And why are we doing this? So I think it's not talked about enough. But I think that it's not necessarily a new thing, which I think can sometimes be the myth.
Yeah, it's largely understandable, and certainly from our experience, when people come to us, that they're coming at us with the angle of, okay, I need to get my website launched, my platform, I need to think about all the logistics, and some of this is true whether it's virtual or physical. I need to worry about catering and all of that, and actually, it seems to me that sometimes there's an awful lot of trust put on speakers. And the speaker has told you have a 30-minute slot and you're going to be talking about this topic, and off you go. And there's almost that inbuilt assumption of, oh, and it'll be good, because why wouldn't it be good? And I know a lot of our time is certainly spent with those speakers who are often coming at it from the case of, okay, I've been given a topic and I know it, but I don't know how to present it. I don't know how to talk about it in a way that's quite exciting. And that, to me, begins to really address that idea of content and the fact that a lot of people, really, whether you're a speaker who's an expert in a topic, you may not be an expert in how to present yourself, and they are different skill sets.
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that happens is in events, first of all, we are always in a hurry. I don't remember the last time I worked at an event, either from a client side or from an agency side, where we had all the time in the world. And whenever we do have all the time in the world, something happens that means we're always in a rush anyway. But I think, so what happens is we're in a rush and that we always have to lock down key elements. It becomes the first thing and everybody sits down and goes, quick, get a venue. Yep. It's September, they're all going to be full, and we have this sort of and then it quickly steamrolls, doesn't it, into logistics and production. And well, if we have got that venue, well, we need to confirm how big that stage will be, and we need to think about this. And I think that sort of does completely steamroll through it. And I do think with the platforms and the website, that's a whole new world for an industry of people who are really great at finding the perfect venue, making it look physically beautiful. So to then suddenly switch into the platform, I can see how it takes up so much time, because equally it is really important that you do have a platform and that it does sort of work for your audience and those things. So I do think that it makes sense how we go about it. But I hope that one of the things we see from the last 12 months is that content does start to sort of peek through a little bit more now that people have gone virtual, because you are right. speakers know their topic, but whether they feel comfortable presenting about it or how they present. And also, I think for the most part, speakers really want to have a really engaging session. They want to do something fun, and they want to make sure that it comes across in the right way. And I think they are really open to new ideas and ways of doing things. So yeah, I do think that we could definitely, and really hope that we'll take that into the physical world whenever it returns, and hybrid and all of those things.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've always taken away is I've never met a speaker who, after being offered support, hasn't just immediately grabbed it with both hands and say, "Oh, thank you. You're here for me. Oh, lovely." Because I've just been told what I've had to do, and that really begins to change the dynamic. And as you say, there's no speaker out there that wants to do a bad job. Everyone wants their kind of moment in the spotlight if they can pull it off, and they just need support in doing that. Just keying into something you said earlier, because I think it's actually a really interesting point of discussion. And just before I do, all of you lovely people watching, we are here for your questions fundamentally, and you will see to the right hand side of the player there is a nice box where you can submit any questions you have for us. More than happy to take those. We have a mound of topics that we can talk through those, so please get those submitted. So point, Caitlin, that you made earlier about this idea of when obviously this pandemic began to happen, and we saw essentially the pivots to virtual as it's kind of come to be known. A lot of talk was about content, and specifically around developing content for a virtual world. What do you think the difference is between your traditional physical event and your virtual event in terms of the content planning? Is there a difference in your mind, or do you come up with different strategies when you're thinking about content in that way?
I guess if I'm honest, I think fundamentally, the approaches should be the same. And for most people I talk to about it, I think that we all went into a flurry. And I think when I say we all, like everyone in events. And so, we did focus on things like platforms and all of that stuff. It was a bit of, and content for a virtual world, like it needed to be completely different. And it goes into the experiences, sort of things that have happened over the last year, which have been amazing around VR and AR and all of this stuff. And sort of those conversations seem to lead a lot of it. But actually, I think that the core of your content and what you want to do should still be the same. The same questions should still be asked around what you're trying to achieve and what you want your audiences to leave with. I think with the virtual, the actual delivery, they can vary. I think that speakers certainly want advice either way. In the virtual world, what obviously we're coming up against is people feeling a bit more nervous because that's the first time they've done it. They might have got up at a million conferences, a million town hall meetings in their own departments and things, and that's fine, but doing it on virtual is a bit unknown. But the benefit of virtual, obviously, is that we get to do something different. Like we are so used to going to these sorts of events and hearing people talk, and there are 3 options that you can do, and that's how we do them. You do a presentation, a Q&A, and in conversation. And virtually, we've just got, there are a lot of ways that you can do it. There are different ways to get into people's sort of days. So I think that although the principles should be the same, what you're trying to achieve, what messages you're trying to get across, who your audience is, understanding who they are, and what you might want to know about your audience by the end of it, all of those principles should still apply, and then it is just the delivery method. So I believe that if you came to me and said, I want to engage 350 of my best friends to talk about content because they love it like I do, and it was like, it's going to be in July, that fundamentally we could have the same early on conversations talking about why you want to talk about content to your closest friends, how you want to get it across, what we know about your closest friends, form all of that, and then from that talk about how we deliver it, whether it's in a park, over the internet, anything like that. So I do think that fundamentally, the principles do remain the same.
Yeah, the foundational structures of good content have not changed, because good content is built to talk to people, and it's not the people that have changed, it's just the medium. There's 2 actually really good questions. I'm jumping to the one from Jane first, because it links into something that we wanted to talk about anyway. And Jane asks, from experience, have you found that audience engagement is best with a one-day agenda or spread out across a few days? Now, Caitlin, this question links into 2 conversations we've had around agendas in general and breaks, and how much is too much and how much is too little. in terms of your views, your experience, where are you coming at it, this problem?
I think it depends on your audience. We so often are assuming that everybody is coming at it from the same perspective. And again, that can be physical or virtual. But I think in the virtual world, there's what we've all sort of quickly done is talk about the fact that everybody's at home, and we're very much aware of people having children at home. And we're very much aware of sort of the changes in everyone's lives and what's happening. But I think the reality is that you will never know what's happening behind this computer with me. So everybody's lives are completely different at home, and we are now putting the content in their home. So whether it be 1 day or 3 days, sometimes I think is a little bit irrelevant, because it does depend who your audience is. If you have a close-knit leadership team and the event is for them, perhaps 1 full day of content is what's going to fit best. It's getting them all together. It's understanding that. If you're looking at a really broad audience, I'm a big believer that give them the content that they can watch in their own time, build the campaign, do podcasts, do some video stuff, do some things that are engaging that you need to be live in the moment, and then do some things that can be pre-recorded or watched in snippets. So I think that it depends on your audience, and I'd love to give you a straight answer that says, yes, 1 day is always better. Audience engagement is definitely better. But I think each individual engages differently, and by planning and allowing for that, that is probably how you'll get the best content out of it and the most engagement.
Yeah, there's this idea of talking to your audience early. And building an expectation with them. So given the option of a 1 day agenda spread across a few days, there's going to be a question of letting the audience know. And this is how we're going to be approaching it. If it's spread across multiple days, it'll be smaller, but then you need a multi-day buy-in from the audience. If it's 1 day, I think people psychologically seem to be more willing to say, actually, I'll book out a day, and that this day I'm at the event, so you can grab their time more easily. Now, whether you actually grab their attention is a different story, sadly. So I think I found in the question of whether I found audience engagement is best with a 1 day or a full day, looking at the data, there's not a correlation. It does depend on a number of kind of compelling factors, one of which being audience. There are others in terms of speakers. What is your show about? How much breaks are you having within there that we need to factor in to keep the audience from being fatigued, and others. So it's a question I know that's on a lot of people's mind. In my experience, it's one that tends to be answered more by budgets than it is by engagement, which is, it's a sad reality, but it is a reality. For many, it's just a case of a multi-day event will require crews over multiple days, and therefore that will be a big budget limitation. And so often we're coming at it from the view of this has to be a 1 day event, and therefore how do we make that 1 day event as engaging as it could be? But Jane, that's a really good question. I think the short answer is it does vary. And it probably comes back to something we've talked about on other webinars here. Is like, what is it that you're trying to do? Is it that you're trying to have an engaging event, or are you trying to do something else? Now, I think engagement is often a byproduct of the objectives of achieving what you want from your event, but it's certainly something that requires a great deal of thought and agenda planning. Just building the broad strokes of what an event will be is something that a lot of people just, again, take as written, or they try and copy what other people have done.
And I think something important is that what engagement means. I think that we talk a lot more about engagement now than we ever did a few years ago, I would say. And the assumption a lot of the time is engagement means the amount of people online at one time looking at their screen, which is your content. And I think that if you really pull that apart, is that, it depends, that might be what you're looking for engagement, because for the team environment that you need, like that could exactly be what it is. And then it's about creating an agenda that keeps people there with really well-timed breaks, with, great ways to get them interacting, getting them moving in and out of all these breakouts, things like that. But also the reality is, if that doesn't necessarily mean that's engaging. So if engagement just means to you that people have understood and got your content, if it means building relationships, the platforms that are available virtually that are built over time and don't have to just be 1 day, and the technologies and things that we have, and recordings, and like I said, podcasts, all those kinds of things can mean that your audience is completely engaged. They're just doing it in their own time.
Yeah.
they are, and I think that's probably one of the key questions to ask, is what engagement means and what kind of data you might be looking to find out about them. What do you need to know about them? I think would probably be one of the key things as well.
Yeah, it speaks to something I find we're saying more and more in internal meetings here, which is that real engagement takes time. And because it takes time and a great deal of thought and planning, it's something that people often don't want to engage with because it's seen as one of those tricky problems that, and you hate to say this, and certainly I do, but some people come at it of a view of, oh, well, it'll be good enough. And that's, if you want to achieve real engagement, if you want people to have a real emotional connection to what you're saying and to change their behaviors or to do what you often want them to do, you have to put in the time. And that's pre-event engagement. That's listening to the audience. That's building a sense of anticipation. That's working with speakers to ensure that everything they say is laser focused on what you want them to achieve, and then reflecting that back at them after the event so that they don't forget those little moments, that they have those little summaries that just help move stuff forward. It takes time, but goodness, I'd say it's worth it. This all links into a nice question from John, which is something that we've been pushing a bit more in terms of, you said on your event page that we should ask our audience to shape our agenda. So audience is shaping the agenda. How would we go about this? Kate, I know we have a number of strategies. Do you want to kind of give your thoughts first?
Yeah, sure. It's probably something. It is something that I talk about a lot. Is if you want to have engaging content, do what they want. So I think ways to do it. It depends on who your audience is, but it is things like understanding in advance what topics are most important. So this could be data you have from previous events. It doesn't have to just be events. It could be any kind of communications you have. I like to think that we know about our audience that this webinar will be the most successful because we know that they like content the most. So it's sort of, if you can find any data, I think that's probably going to help to understand where you've had the most engagement. That's definitely going to be useful. And then it's all about the pre-communications. I think people are excited to ask questions. One of the biggest things that I get on most events is Q&As. When done well, some of the most engaging sessions in that we have the most interest, always running out of time. People are desperate to feel like they're having their question answered. So instead of leaving it to on the day and just going, oh, okay, we'll make sure we put Q&A in, start asking them in advance. Start topics on forums that sort of help get talking. Do communications letters in advance. So trying to really understand what people are interested, what they're feeling, how they're thinking, what topics they're most interested in. So then you can do it in ways where you get them talking, and you can do really simple things like poll. Test the water. Do some polls with your audience, depending who they are. To say, if which of these would you prefer to see more. Whatever those results are probably really going to help. It's going to help you understand what they want to see. And I think obviously there's a lot of content that you need to get across. You may need to get across what the business objectives are. That's really important. But I don't actually think there's any harm in asking your audience, we know you're at home. How would you like to see this? Or I think generally just like keeping the communications up and allowing them the opportunity to share what they'd like to see.
Yeah. I've often come at it, certainly with a lot of clients, in asking the first question is whether this agenda is locked or if it's unlocked. Because if it's unlocked, then, hey, everything's up for grabs. Now, I appreciate for a lot of planners, this is the biggest leap of faith possible. And for a while, we had that weird, uncomfortable term, the unconference, which I never necessarily aligned with. It's a bit of a weird term, but the idea being that you know that you are running an event on a given topic, on a given strategy, and you put it out, you get your interest in, because people should trust you as a planner and as a brand and as an identity that they want to get involved. And then in part of registration, you're asking the questions of, here is the buffet of content themes and speakers that you can engage with. What are you most interested in? And they begin to pick, and then you use that data to build your agenda out. Now, some talks get cut, some talks get lengthened, some talks get reimagined, and that becomes this incredibly empowering thing from the audience, because you end up with an agenda that has been built by them, and it's been built by what they want to know. Now, again, that's not always possible, because for a whole variety of reasons. Certainly if you're dealing with like physical locations where you need to think about room space and all of that, it's a lot more workable in a virtual space, which is kind of one of those hidden benefits that I don't think people talk about. If it's a locked agenda, as you say, there is still so much you can do. Sometimes it's even, again, with that groundwork with speakers, of getting a speaker to understand that a poll is not a break for the audience to just not have to listen to the speaker for a bit. It's like we're building a roadmap, and every single poll is a fork in the road. And you ask the question, you see what the audience says, and you shift the direction of your talk to follow that route, because that's what they're most interested in. And so you're building content around what the audience wants to hear. Q&A is obviously the fantastic example, because it doesn't exist without audience participation, and therefore you get the questions that the audience want asked. That's true throughout the entire life cycle of, and I think a big thing becomes getting people out of this thinking that an event is a short number of days or a single day or an hour. Something that I've said to a lot of our clients and to a lot of people in general is, your event starts with that first email. Whether you want it to or not, that's when your event starts, and it ends on the final communication. You may have a set number of days within there, but that's not your event. Your event is larger than that. I was wanting to get your opinion, Caitlin, then on what I would call these event phases, and this idea of the pre-event days, the event days themselves, and then after the event days. When you're thinking about content, are you building content differently within those phases, or again, are you treating it the same? How do you strategize around that?
I think they are different. The sort of pre, during, and post. I think that of the pre-communications for any event, physical, virtual, hybrid, etc., are always so strongly focused on obviously click-throughs and numbers, and getting those numbers locked in for your event, which is really important. Completely understandable. But I think in terms of I think what often gets missed is real content in the pre-event, and this does go back to, we're always in a hurry. So I think often it's just trying to quickly get as much interaction as you can, with the assumption that once you've got them registered and they clicked through, great, that's what you needed to do. It's just right, you just needed to get those numbers up. That's what we needed to do. And then obviously just remind them that they've said they'll come, with the expectation that 30% of them will drop out. We all talk about it. So I think that what is exciting about virtual is being able to peter the bits of content in throughout it, and not just a video of the CEO saying, I'm really excited for you to be there on the day. Is there not a way where you could, be things like giving people little snippets of things to listen to before the event? You're going to have a speaker who's really interesting and is going to talk about a specific topic. Like, can you get an audio recording of them doing a little Q&A with someone and just sort of peter that out? It gets people excited. It helps develop the content that people may want to see when they see live, helps them think of questions. It just gives a little bit of insight into what the event's going to be, and then hopefully as well some interest, so people are sort of teasing it more. So I think the pre-content is slightly different, because it is a run-in into the bigger live event. And then when you're looking at the live event, you are definitely looking at a lot of interaction a lot of the time. That's people's biggest thing. They want to find ways to get people to interact. And often I think they think there's a barrier virtually that you can't get interaction. And admittedly, it is different. And I think that technology is going to keep progressing us forward and more forward, so that we can understand different ways to do it, and we can I just think we're going to see in technology and interaction should be really interesting over the next few years. But there are ways to interact with your audience. There are things that can be done. And in particular, it is a lot of things just like asking questions, getting them to vote on things, those sort of things. So I think if you've done some of the pre-communications in the build-up, which is sort of these little snippets to get people excited, then when you get into the actual day content, you would hope that people are already engaged, because they've already sort of learnt bits that they wanted. They've sort of had conversations on forums. They've perhaps even met some of the other participants virtually, physically in the lead up. And then post-coms, I think that a lot of the time we are focusing on reflection, that it's always about, let's reflect on what we saw. But I also think that there is a really interesting way that you can follow it on. You've got a session where there's been a lot of interest and a lot of engagement. There's a speaker who perhaps did some polls. There were forks in the road that went different ways. What about if after that speaker session, you managed to get a recording of them talking about if they went the other way? Because 10% of that audience was still interested. What about if you had post recordings of things that happened afterwards, which might be more questions that got asked, and then answered by speakers? That's a really big thing, is I think people looking for more information, but as soon as it shuts down, it goes. So I think post-comms could really start to advance into furthering the information that there is, so you get even more content out of it, rather than just the traditional, here's a wrap-up of what we did. As well as, I've just thought of another thing, I think something that's quite interesting is when we've got hour-long presentations, find a way to cut that down to bite size. What were the top 10 topics of each thing? Whether it's that you've got a copywriter sat listening to it and recording it, because for not everyone, they want 60 minutes of one speaker, but they do want to know the 10 most interesting things that they said. So I think that it's reflection, and it is reflecting to say, wasn't that great? But it's also another way to give information and to sort of twist the information that you've got out of speakers to make it digestible for your audience as well when it comes to post-comms.
Yeah, the power of a short summary is very much understated, but it can be done. I used to say, like, the amount of things I've picked up from a 5-minute YouTube tutorial are quite powerful, because they can cut out everything that is essentially sometimes just the padding that makes it. It obviously requires someone with an editorial mind to be able to cut it down, but it's hugely powerful in terms of summary. I think from my perspective, my big broad strokes brush, which I like to paint things with, I always think of that pre-event phase and that post-event phase as being very emotionally driven. The pre-event is anticipation that we're trying to build, and there is something of a lost art form almost in understanding that we are in many ways manipulating emotion. The thing that is gone unspoken in the traditional event space is your giant spectacle staging is there to build a sense of awe. And we do theatre sometimes in terms of building a show that makes people feel and think certain things, and emotional kind of play is really important in that. And that pre-event phase is that anticipation, whether it's for an event as a whole, for a given speaker, for just understanding that the audience is being listened to, and therefore they're going to have their needs more met on the days themselves. That play is quite important. And then the post-event, as you say, this period of reflection is an opportunity to turn delegates into fans. People that really maybe have had, because they don't have someone kind of summarizing the close of an event, and most event closes are actually fairly terrible. It's someone saying, yes, we talked about X, Y, and Z, and goodbye everyone, hope you had a nice time. So actually chances for a planner and a client to reflect on what were the big selling points of an event, and to really put those under the microscope, share those with the audience. Then the audience think that there's a little bit of psychological play here of, it's not what happened, it's what you say happened. That's a hugely powerful thing that I think a lot of people just gloss over. So do think about the idea of playing with emotions as opposed to just thinking, okay, these are different content phases. But again, your event is so much larger than just these sparse few days, and an appreciation for that only makes things better. We have some lovely. Sorry, Kim.
Oh, sorry. When it comes to the closing, I think that's really important, because everybody wants to have a closing. There's normally one person in mind who everybody wants to do the close, and it's normally someone relatively senior, or there's some sort of importance, and it's like that being one of the final things and this final message, but also the fear that people have checked out by then, which is quite likely. I think that can happen in the physical world as well. I don't think there's an assumption that just because you're physically in a space, you're there at all. So I think that with the that's what is really interesting about closing, is that if people are checking out, then focus on post-event comms as part of your closing, that it's not just about someone standing up going, wasn't that great, who's also probably tired because they've been there all day, etc. So I think that's a really interesting point about closings.
I like what you just said there is put very few words on something I've felt for a long time. It's just because someone's physically in place doesn't mean they're there. And that was always the kind of, oh, well, the event room is full, so that means everyone's engaged. Does it? Most people are just on their smartphones checking emails. Like, it's such a lost thought. I was just going to dip in, just lovely comments from John, Abby, and a second Abby, just in terms of some feedback on the previous bits. That big love for the buffet of agenda items, the speakers talk as the poll, and the bite-sized content post-event. So thank you to everyone for those for lovely comments. Abby asks, what's the process with working with you? But I think we can expand this out to more generals. What's the process with working to create a content plan for an event or an event strategy for a business? How do you kind of like to sit down and tackle this, Caitlin?
Big question. Thank you, Abby. Putting me to the test. I think it's quite broad. So an event strategy across a company would be a dream for me, to be able to talk about not just one event, to talk about them, everything that's delivered. Because obviously, quite often on the agency side, we are just involved in one. So having looking at them across is one of the exciting things. I just had a client. We just did our first event with them, and they've rebooked for the second one. So immediately we started talking about we could continue on with that, which was really exciting. But I think the process is always has to start with your objectives, with understanding your audience, and understanding what you're looking to get out of any of your events, what messaging. So that would always be the first piece, is start getting some of these key questions out there. I think until we get answers for those, and it's not as, I would say personally working with me, it's not that I expect that I send out a document and it comes back. Happy to sort of talk about them. Sometimes it's the best way to do it. So sort of really going out and getting those, collecting all of that information and having that kind of idea to understand what the business is looking to achieve out of events, and that it's not that just the sort of, there's an events department. It's like, okay, what are we looking to achieve from that? What kind of things do you hope to get out of it? So then going on from that, now that we're entered into a world that is virtual, hybrid, no one's quite sure probably what that means yet, physical, who knows what's happening. I think that then you've got a really great way of being able to then look at everything you're looking to achieve. I really wish I had a whiteboard right now, but it's sort of like looking at everything you're looking to achieve, what you need, and then looking at all the different ways that you could look at achieving that through different methods. And I think that's how I would look to build a strategy, is to look at your objectives, look at your audience, match it up, understand what they want, do some pre-communications perhaps before you've even planned out that strategy of how you're going to tackle things, but like start communicating with people early with some little snippets of content that you've got, things like that. Understand what's needed, and then you would be able to look at everything that you want to achieve, the messages that you are looking to get out, how and where they might be throughout a year. I'm imagining this is a 12-month strategy, Abby. So imagining how they might need to come out across
it's 36. It's real long term. Yeah. It's exactly what you've always wanted.
Yes, the longer the better. How they might, and then looking at ways that you're going to sort of approach those event-wise, and whether you're looking at physical, virtual, tapping into different bits in different areas, understanding the audience, and whether you're looking to attract a whole audience at all times or smaller ones. I'm a really big fan of targeted audiences and understanding which audiences need to see which bits of information from you. So looking at, that's how I would sort of tackle the strategy, understanding those elements, and then starting to look at different ways that they are going to work for an event. That's probably my approach, but I'll hand over to you, Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, we used to call them the pillars. And I guess in terms of a content plan for a single event, I think more of them are kind of like the building blocks. What do I have to work with? And objectives is obviously at the heart of everything, and just asking, like, what are we trying to do here? Just weirdly, in so many meetings I've had, just asking that question, what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish, just tends to reset the mind a little bit, because it is very easy to get locked in on we're doing an event, and therefore kind of mind's in many different places. So objectives is a huge one. The content in terms of the speakers, because the speakers are a key building block, and unless you have dealing with a client that has a huge budget to bring people in, you're then relying on either internal speakers that they're bringing to bear, or people that you can approach to be a part of the event. But again, that can be a limiting factor that's so important. Data in terms of what we're hoping to grab, and then legacy. What leads after this? What are we doing either after the event or into subsequent events? They become so formative in terms of just building a content plan. And often there's sometimes a misconception that you take that away and you come back with something that's then, right, that's it, that's signed off and off we go. But instead it needs to be something of a straw man, something that people can attack to say, oh, actually, this gives us now an idea of what the event could be. We're going to chop and change some more, and that's fine. That's part of the process. It's actually quite an exciting part of the process. And then once you have that shell, looking at where we're at with breaks, days, all of that actually goes into the final content plan. I think you're quite right. To tackle it as a business is where you want to be in an ideal world, because events lead to events. There's this idea of kind of that a lot of events are often at a point of crisis, and if it's part of a wider strategy, you understand that the events that happen feel natural because they're all leading on to different marketing points or communications points or anything like that. I mean, Live Group, we have obviously we call it a discovery process where we will sit down with a client over quite a number of days to talk about a whole manner of things with their key stakeholders. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It involves quite an honest dialogue. I find there are some kind of conversations you go into where it's like, well, what is the point of the event? And the point of the event can be to make money, and that's fine. That's not something to be shied away from. It's important. Commerciality is an important thing, but you need to put it on the table to know it's important, because for different groups it isn't so. So it is a huge mountain of work, but really quite an exciting one. It comes into a question that Jessica's asked in terms of like wider event strategy. On event strategy, have you thought much about doing asynchronous work between events? Well, so participants can build or explore to inform the next event. And this idea of events as a series of one leading to the other, and actually that stuff builds over time. I have a huge pile of thoughts on this, Caitlin, but people have heard enough of my voice. Do you have anything on this?
I think event series are an incredibly powerful way to run your events. I've always been a big fan of them. I think it's one of the best ways to build momentum, one of the best ways to understand what your audience needs. They tend to, anywhere that I have sort of previously worked on, they do often tend to be a really successful way of doing it. Get it right the first time and people will keep coming back. People want to come back to things that they've seen before. And knowing that it's good. Like, how often do you hear, I went to one of those the other week, they always do a really good job there, it's really great. Understanding that each time they go, they're going to get they're going to get an experience that was valuable, but they're going to get something new that they want. And it ties into a communications plan that builds out, and it is also understanding that you start small, that you start with a small group of people, with the right audience, the right group, and then it slowly builds. Because I think that is what makes events great. I think it's what makes some of the bigger events in the world great. It is clearly what makes Glastonbury great. It's that they started small, they got a reputation, and people go because of what it is, because they know that they're going to get a certain experience there. And obviously Glastonbury is miles apart from a conference or a sales meeting, but it is similar. That's why there are a lot of brands out there. There are the likes of the Googles where it's in a lot of places. It's like, oh, Google's got an event, I'll go to that because we know it will be a really good experience. So I do think there's real value in doing series, and rather than going, we do one big event each year and that's it. I think there is real value in building your audience. Having said that, it really does depend on your audience, on whether that is right, or whether actually the big effect of one event and putting into that is right. It does depend on what you are trying to achieve, but very big fan of series of events. Yeah,
I guess feeling a bit more future focused in terms of where I want things to be in really how I'd like them to be now, but certainly a place I want to build to is this idea that an event is in many ways, certainly a series of events, and certainly a lot of what we're trying to do clients is build communities. And the actual idea behind that is something of a fallacy. You don't build communities. You give people the opportunity to create a community, a safe space, an understanding that they're meeting with peers, and all we can do is facilitate that. Now, there are so many, this idea of neurodiversity, and for me, the question of accessibility. Are we offering something to all manner of people in terms of what makes them happiest, what makes them comfortable? That point that there are some people for whom the idea of networking, even the idea of physically being present in a place is not what they're looking for. it's not what excites them. It's not where they would want to go. And you can either exclude those people or you can find a way to talk with them. And when I think of the current toolbox, and again, we have to put COVID in a box and kind of think of a world post-COVID to really do this well. But you begin to understand that there are thousands of ways of building something that could qualify as an event, and therefore you can begin to look at a series of events in terms of, yeah, this one is actually a 1 hour very informal kind of digitally focused breakout session. This one is more of a larger live stream. This one is actually an in-person networking breakfast. This one is a meeting of minds where we're going to workshop some stuff in person. This is going to be the same, but in a digital environment. And suddenly you're understanding that you have this varied and exciting audience types that are going to be serviced in different things. And actually, your group of people meeting physically will inform the content of the group of people meeting digitally, but they're all under the same umbrella of this community. And things, people then feel like they're being spoken to in a way that is for them. It's personalized. It's a message that they can kind of get out their own way. There's the second thing, which I think has also become a bit of a lost art, but is I think more accessible now than ever, which is when you're looking at your big banner stand event with thousands of delegates. Why isn't the smaller event one of those things that we do in the run-up, in that pre-event phase? And something that we've talked about for a while is this idea of, yeah, we're going to have thousands of people coming, but we're going to run a series of smaller events in the build-up to, one, workshop some of the content, to build anticipation, to talk about some of the macro level themes, but maybe with a more niche perspective, maybe with a different audience group that will particularly connect with that. And that can be so valuable, because then suddenly when you come to launch your big event, you've already got a huge amount of audience data and pre-event work and thoughts and that everything that informs that larger scale event. So it's hugely exciting, I think. We have I
agree.
Good, yeah.
Yeah,
You're full of crap, Bruce. Yeah. What are you talking about? John asks, which I think is a question that comes to a lot of people's minds, is, I like the idea of creating a good experience, but how easy is it to measure the success of that aims? I mean, there's a question that links into data here, but I guess first off, what does good look like to you, Caitlin?
What does good look like? I guess the blunt answer is good looks like you've met your objectives. You know, you've said what you wanted to achieve out of it, and you've achieved it, and you've made it measurable. Good objectives should be measurable. Should be able to do that. It has been a long-standing problem with events up until probably recently, where everybody is saying, how do you measure? How do you measure it? How do you measure it? And I agree, it is a really big challenge to understand how you know when it's good. I think the virtual world is making it a lot easier with data, with being able to really understand feedback from guests and understanding how they moved around. And I think that is only going to continue to advance. What we're seeing in the virtual world with these events on platforms and things is that they are eventually going to become, I think, as big as sort of like media sources, and all of the data will flow in a similar way. And what you'll learn about your audience will become incredibly powerful and will absolutely dictate how you move forward with events physically and virtually. In a physical event, again, I think it's about what objectives you've set in that physical event. In terms of understanding if you've met them, I do agree that it does have challenges. The typical thing, obviously, is always to send out, a post survey to understand how people felt. And I think asking people is definitely something really important to understand. And I think the other thing is listening in, seeing how the content goes, watching the room, understanding those things. But I do think physical events are hard to gauge, and there's a lot of technology out there that will track people's mobile phones to tell you how many people moved back and forth between different areas. And for some events, I think that technology is really powerful to understand, your numbers and how you engaged with people. But in terms of your content being successful, in a physical event. I think in a virtual event it's easier to see because you can see engagement. You can see when people are asking questions. You can see when the thirst is really there to know that information, to learn more, to engage. In a physical environment, we are lucky enough now that we are moving into hybrid, where I don't think you will see any more. I wouldn't recommend as much any more sessions in conferences where you put your hand up as much. I think it will be a lot more about using the things like your Slidos to be able to really get people to engage. I think that's how you'll start to measure, is I think we're going to bring the digital into the physical to be able to get better measurement, to understand that. And I think that's probably how you're going to find measuring in the physical world an easier thing to do.
Yeah, there is certainly this idea of active and passive data gathering. The active being the survey, it's tell us your thoughts. The passive being often tracking that happens behind the scenes. I think a key understanding is that both have their pitfalls. The active one, you'll probably get a slightly different answer from the same person, whether you ask the question in the middle of an event, at the end of it, or 3 weeks after, just because of how the mind works and how memory works and how people like to reflect on things. And passive data can lead you towards a certain conclusion that may be entirely wrong, depending on how that data was gathered, or whether you're looking for a given answer as opposed to trying to analyze the data. It is why data analysis is a monstrously complex thing, and the lovely Laura Whittington, who runs our digital teams, that's what occupies a lot of her time, is just kind of grappling with the data and coming up with pathways that begin to make sense of this. There is this idea, though, of objectives. And it's interesting because I read this question, my initial thought was like a big thing for me would be like that almost like delegate feel-good factor. But you make the point that objectives are at the core of this, and some events don't necessarily seek to build to that feel-good factor. We did an event on climate change at the end of last year. Now, that was an incredibly important event, but its purpose was not necessarily to leave the audience feeling good about things. It was to inspire change, and sometimes you need to shock people to do that. Now, therefore, the good measurement there is how much change is instanced because of that event. Now, that's a much trickier thing to measure. The one thing I would say to John is a pitfall of the hybrid world and the virtual world, and as you say, I don't think we're ever going back to that truly physical, which won't have an element of digital data gathering, is because there are so many variables to track. The temptation is always there to gather everything and then paint the target around where the data lies, and just don't do that. Just set yourself, well, what is a good experience? Well, maybe it's, I want a 5-star rating for sessions at the end of the event. Well, then we're going to chase that, and we're going to work a lot with speakers. Maybe it's we're going to inspire change, so we're going to contact delegates a month after to see what they have done. And our percentage of replies will be a big indicator of how much we've done. So there are a lot of variables, a lot to bear in mind. But that shouldn't dissuade you. Just don't paint the target around where the data lies. Andrea asks, and really like this question, not necessarily a question, more a statement, but I think something that we should touch on in terms of accessibility is key in the current times. I have found on-demand content really useful throughout lockdown, as I can plan it around my schedule. And there is this fact that people's lives are getting busier than ever, and we live in an on-demand world, and this idea of content your way has become quite important to my thinking, I think, because there was a time when we were little young Bruce wanted to watch The Simpsons, the new episodes of The Simpsons. I had to wait to 7 p.m. on Sky One, because that's when The Simpsons was broadcast. And now, when when the new season of The Queen comes out on Netflix, and we're not sponsored by Netflix, otherwise the production would be a lot bigger. I just watch everything in one big go, and I get it immediately. And this idea of immediacy and being able to basically build content around how people want to digest it is becoming more to the fore. In terms of content accessibility then, Caitlin, what do you think about?
I guess I agree that I think accessibility in terms of on demand and allowing people to choose how they consume is really important. I think that we are moving closer to a world, and I really hope we are, where flexibility is key. We are seeing businesses move to these models a lot more. I think it was Spotify announced the other day that the policy is now you can work where you want. So I think that when it comes to content, we should apply similar views to it, because you are right, everybody is different. Despite the fact that I'm able to talk on this, and it was once described as I could talk underwater with marbles in my mouth, I hate networking. I will dodge it. It's not part of my personality, but I love meeting new people. So I think that if everybody has their niches, and like they sort of said, like being able to listen on demand is so beneficial, because for some people, actually waking up at 6 a.m. and putting that on is when they absorb that content the best. So why force them into 10 a.m. because you are sure that's the best time? Because at 10 a.m. we think most people have sent their children to school and done the dishes, and as a result, that will work. Everyone's had their 9 a.m. meeting. 10 a.m. is definitely the right slot. We've put all the time and energy into the right slot. We've thought about it. We've asked everyone. Well, actually, put the time and energy into making something really interesting that people want to hear, and then allow them to view it when they want to view it. Because I think that we are moving to a world where we can access anything, anytime, anyway. So why make events different? I think it will change in the physical world. And it'll be interesting to see how the industry goes, because numbers are a huge thing. How many events have we all done where we had 500 one year, and then the next year the target is 1,000 because people loved it? And I think that now I hope that budgets will perhaps need to stretch over and start to look at that, extending their physical event, which is perfect for the people that really want to be there in person, that love the networking side, that just gets so much out of the physical element, which is a huge amount of people. And then also being able to reach out to those who aren't able to make it on the day for several reasons. One of them because they don't want to, the other because they're busy, because actually 11 till 4 doesn't work on the 27th of February. In fact, the next day does. So I think that it's something people should be considering a lot more. And it goes back to, what does engagement mean to you? Does it mean like 100 people in the same spot at the same time? Or does it mean people understanding your message and starting a conversation with them about that over the next 3 months through communications?
Yeah. The accessibility question is, I think, just lies at the core of everything that we're trying to do. Certainly in terms of almost building communities and making people feel like they have a place. And often an event is that. It's giving people a sense of place and a sense that they're surrounded by people that are aligned in the same way that they are. And sometimes that's just because they work for the same company. Sometimes that's because they share the same interests. Obviously, you look at something like Glastonbury, it's the music. If you look at football stadiums, it's the football teams. But it is a sense of place and almost family that we're trying to build. And if you're not doing that in an accessible mindset, you really are failing. And it stretches to things, I won't give us a pass in this. Like, when I think about accessibility, it's like subtitles for people of hard of hearing. Now we poll people on whether they need subtitles and things like that, and building it in on a grander scale is obviously expensive, but it needs to be done, and we got to get better at it. Equally, representation matters. It's just such a critical thing in terms of people want to see themselves reflected in some of the content. And if you've got speakers that are reflective of your audience, then you're mattering to them. You're building in kind of the things that people want to see. I think one of my hopes is that the days of the white middle-aged panel dies. White middle-aged male panel dies, because it was always the male thing that was the kicker, because there's no excuse now. You can get a speaker to talk at your event at the push of a button, so why wouldn't you? And so if you're not thinking of that accessibility in your content planning, if you're being exclusionary, you've got a real problem, and one that needs addressing. This also comes to come to Andrea's point, this idea of, okay, the conference is being recorded. People can watch it on demand, and maybe then there's ways to build in post-event engagement channels, so as people still get to have a say. This comes back to one of Jessica's earlier points about building a series of events, because then those people can still impact stuff that's yet to happen. So that the so the accessibility question is often framed as a way of closing doors, because people think, oh, actually we have to factor in getting captions in, and we have to do this, and we have to do that, and actually it should be one of opening them, because really you are unlocking a whole swathe of possibilities, and in some ways unlocking your audience. It is very near and dear to my heart, and it's a great question. Thank you for that, Andrea. We're nearly at the end, Caitlin. An hour has quite literally flown by. 55 minutes gone on the blink of an eye. We'll end then on question from Becky, and it's a tricky one, but don't worry, because there's no right or wrong answer. No one's going to hold us to account here. I'd love to hear your industry predictions for 2021 and beyond. So gaze into your crystal ball.
What are my industry predictions? I think we're going to see some similar chaos to what we saw 12 months ago. Honestly, I think that the industry has moved at such a rapid pace over the last 12 months, and what we're going to see over the next 12 months in light of the announcements this week will probably be equally as catastrophic in some ways. There's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of everybody trying to get the right answer. And I think that as a result, we will see a lot of physical events starting to come about in the second half of the year. We have some big leaders in terms of numbered events. We know that Reading and Leeds will go ahead in August. We say we know, that's ridiculous. We don't know anything. We never have. So that, there's a lot going on around it, and I believe there is a huge flurry within the industry to prepare for it. For some of the big major events that we'll see, I imagine things like Mobile World Congress, Cannes Lions, some of those really big sort of big events that we see come around each year as agencies and things like that will be frantically acting to get back live. What I hope to see is some real opportunity for creativity on what we can do now, that we can take a lot of the learnings that we've had in the virtual world to be able to make these more accessible events. Because I think what is going to be really interesting is what we see audiences do. We are so frantically worrying about what we can do and what brands will do, what companies will do, which way agencies will go as an industry, which way the major events will go. Reading and Leeds probably won't have a problem. Every person graduating high school is ready, like they're ready to get out. But in other events, I think it'll be watching what the audiences do. That's going to be the most important thing. There is a lot of talk that some people don't want to go out. And obviously the reality is people have changed locations, changed mindsets. And I think we have given a free pass to a lot of people who didn't want to go in the first place to events now. And I think that will be what everybody is watching closely, is which way the audiences go. And so I think we will see tiptoes into physical worlds to see what happens. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of conversations about defining hybrid, because I think we're talking about it, but whether we really know what it's going to mean, be unsure. But I think that will be my prediction, is that we're going to see a lot of chaos. We're going to see what this hybrid world might mean, and we're going to watch audiences to see how interested they are in coming back physically. And it's a really amazing opportunity to test the water, to take some risks and see how people want to absorb your content. Because if we don't take the risks, we're just going to go back to what we were, which was a great life. We all loved being on site. I miss it terribly, but I think that this is a real opportunity for us to look at different ways to engage people. Yeah,
good 3 predictions there. I think all I'd say is beware false prophets. This is what I keep coming back to, is that I think we're going to see some people that are basically saying that, no, we have to stick with virtual. Some people, no, we need the hardest possible swing into physical. And some people, as you say, trying to define hybrid and saying, no, this is the only route forward now. And I think all of it's just going to be nonsense. I think the future is an event toolbox that's been made bigger, and that's a good thing. It's an audience type that actually has expanded in the grand scheme of things. Yes, footfall has died, but more people are engaging with events because the barriers to entry have been lowered, and therefore that's going to create something special going forward. I think we are now, our minds have hopefully been opened to this understanding that the digital delegation is no different from the physical one, and in fact they're just as important, and their numbers can be bigger, and therefore isn't that worth planning around. And then finally, as you say, it's this understanding that we don't get through something as large as what the world is currently going through without behaviors being changed forever. And what those behaviors will be in the future, no one knows. You have to look at the audience, you have to adapt. It probably comes back to the idea of delegate-led planning and really getting to grips in that and thinking of events as series and much wider macro level things than people have before. But yeah, if I'm wrong, don't tell me, because I'll just say I picked the wrong time frame, and actually this is all on 10-year scales, not the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, that is all we have time for. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing those thoughts. Obviously, if you want to get in touch with Caitlin to ask her more questions, ask for more of those future predictions, you can see that her LinkedIn information is just on the screen. If you're not done hearing my voice, you can see that my LinkedIn information is on the screen. And as you can also see, I'm going to try and point. No, that's the wrong way. This is where I get my camera angles wrong. There we are. In the top left of the screen, you've got the hello@Live Group email address if there's anything that you want the lovely folks at Live Group to tackle for you. Otherwise, all I would say is, as something I always end the show on, is there has been some talk of hope recently, which is so good to see. As you all know by now, hopefully, that mental health is so very important to me, and it's okay not to be okay. Even in the light of some positive news and some sunshine, it's okay not to be okay. All you got to do is talk to people, and if you don't feel you can talk to anyone, please know that there are people, and I'm one of them. And I hope, as always, you're well, you're happy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.